2 weeks in now. The first week, not much changed. It basically looked the same as when I originally planted it. But by week 2, this is where you start to usually see a little bit of die-off. And this happens, some of the plants in there and some of the strands that you've separated and planted may not do as well as the others and will give up the ghost and just sort of rot away. Which isn't optimal, but it is a part of the dry start method. Many people experience this. It's not a huge deal. Usually by week 4, which we will update then, you'll start to see the explosive growth start to happen. Now, there are some sections in this that are a little worse than others. You can definitely see some die-off on the leaves, some yellowing in leaves, some just basically look gray or translucent because they're, again, dying off. But there is a really nice section which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the tank, which just so happens to be the shortest amount of substrate, which means the most access to water for those plants. That is very lush and green and looking pretty good. So what that tells me is really I should step up the amount of misting that I'm currently doing, especially for the plants that are further away from that shallow amount of water in the bottom of the tank. And considering I've got almost 6 inches or more of substrate at the back of the tank, those plants are probably going to need the most attention. But that's pretty much it. I just got to step that up and they should be doing good. I'm really glad to see that I've got some pretty good growth down in that corner. It's very encouraging, and I'm expecting that the next update, which is the 4-week update, we'll be seeing a lot more growth. And I have something to be a lot more proud of. So it has now been 4 weeks. The growth is much easier to see now than it was on week 2. We're still having a little bit of trouble up at the top there where it's a little bit drier because it's so far away from that base layer of water at the bottom under the substrate. But overall, things are going really well. When you look at it nice and close, you can see that we're getting lots of little strings of new baby tears growing outwards. When we look at the substrate, we can see a lot more in the way of roots coming down as the plants grow and thicken up. We've got a pretty substantial carpet down on the bottom left-hand side where we had a really nice carpet the last time. You know, we could see that it was growing in. Well, that's almost where it needs to be for me to start getting comfortable to fill up the tank. So we're getting real close. I definitely want to see things settle up top a little bit more. I do spray as often as I can. I don't want to spray too much more because you can see on the left side we're starting to get water pooling. And if it gets any higher than that, I'm going to have to siphon it off. So yeah, things are coming along. We're going to see it again on week 6. See you in 2 seconds. Well, we are back with the high-tech planted build, and we've got a carpet. It's been about 6 weeks that have gone by since I started planting the dry start carpet that we were doing in this tank. The dwarf baby tears have really come a long way, but we've hit a bit of a wall here, and that is that I'm actually now starting to get some die-off on the left side of the tank. This is probably because this is where the water pools the most, and even though I use a airline tubing and a long rigid tube to suck the water out of that side as best I can, we're probably getting a little bit of maybe some ammonia buildup or something. There's a lot of nutrient in this substrate. It wouldn't surprise me if some of that's breaking down and causing some burning issues essentially in the roots of the plants or even in the leaves of the plants, causing that kind of dieback. So that tells me I cannot wait any longer with this, and I'm gonna have to fill this tank up and get the CO2 started and give these plants a little bit of breathing space and dilute whatever ammonia is in the system, allow the cycle to finish, and then hopefully the plants will stop dying back and start thriving like they have been for weeks. It's pretty obvious that it's just the side of the tank that has the extra water pooled up on it. The other side here that is elevated, where the plants are not directly in the water that's underneath the substrate, they're looking bushy and lush and really great. Still a little bit of dryness up at the top of the tank there that have caused some browning of the leaves. That never really stopped regardless of how much I missed it, and obviously I didn't want to miss too often or too much because then it just created more pooled water on this side of the tank. So let's just get this thing filled up and make these plants comfy. But before I fill the tank, I've got to get the filtration, everything back on, because it's not on right now, and I need it. Well, they need it. It is needed. Well, I definitely don't want to pour it in. Siphoning it in is probably the best bet. Now the question is, What do I have that's tall enough to set the bucket on so that I can siphon it in there slowly through a thin tube? Oh, we can put a stool on a table. Yay! Nice. All right, so here's what's gonna happen. I've got a table here and I've put a stool on it so I can get the bucket of water, get it up on the stool, use a nice thin tube to siphon the water into the tank. It's gonna be a slow way to fill the system, but the payoff is that I'm not gonna be disturbing everything. I'm probably gonna siphon it just into the plants here. The plants and the roots are gonna hold the substrate in place. That is where they are the thickest and bushiest, so that is the plan of action. What I'm using to fill this tank, there's two ways I was thinking of doing this. Number one, I could use all RODI and use replenish to add some of the hardness back into the water because my well water is very hard and full of all kinds of stuff. But it's not full of anything harmful. So what I'm actually going to do instead, which is always an option for you, is you can go half RODI and half tap water, or in this case, well water that is dechlorinated. Now, my well doesn't have any chlorine, so that's not really an issue. I'm just going to be mixing 50% RODI and 50% well water, and we'll see what that does in terms of getting us to a nice, nice medium, not too hard, not too soft. That's heavy. It's close to, if not 50 pounds, lifting up to my chin. Not easy for little old me, but I didn't drop it, so we're good. Let's get the tubing in there and suck some water out. Now, this is clean water, so I'm not really worried about getting a mouthful, so I'm gonna start a siphon the old-fashioned way with La Bouche. Okay, so just on the surface of the water here, it looks like there's a bunch of like tiny little white dots. And those are actually springtails, which are a type of invertebrate. They're basically a little bug. They've got like a, almost like a fifth leg attached to their butt that they can flick with great force and send themselves flying. So if you see them popping around, that's what's going on there. And they're very, very, very light. So they basically sit on the surface tension of the water and they don't sink. They're really, really common to find in houseplants or outside in the backyard. They are a favorite food of small dart frogs. I'm very familiar with springtails from my foray with keeping vivariums and dart frogs. They're completely harmless, but unfortunately, none of these guys are going to survive because they can't survive on water for a super long period of time. Oh well, but it was cool that they were in there. Next bucket. And this is why I have towels right there at all times. And it's time to prime. If you come over here, you can see all of the springtails are just piled up on the edge of the tank. They're all like escapeing. They're all over the stand. They're everywhere. So now that the tank is full of water, the filter is running, it is time to get that CO2 started. When you're first flooding a tank that has carpeting plants in it, you usually want to have that CO2 injection a little bit on the higher side versus the lower side, just to make sure that they're getting all the CO2 that they need and you don't have any unnecessary dieback or unwanted dieback. So first thing we're going to do is make sure that the CO2 bottle is completely closed. And before I open up the solenoid via the power cable, I'm going to introduce some CO2. Not much. Just get this open. We can see here on our pressure gauge, and over on this side, we have pressure. Now I'm going to open up that solenoid, and we're going to start letting some CO2 through. And there is the bubble counter. So the idea for relatively high CO2 is usually considered around 1.5 or 2 bubbles a second to start off. Getting a little bit of CO2 sneaking around the actual diffusion plate instead of through it. It should all be coming out of these as these tiny little bubbles, but we're getting some big chunky bubbles too. And we don't want that. So I'm going to shut off the solenoid here, and I'm going to take the diffuser out of the tank and try to adjust it to fix that problem, because that's not good. That's just when the bubbles are big like that and they just go shooting at the surface, there's very little contact time for the amount of CO2 that's in that bubble, which means that's just wasted CO2. It's wasted. It's just putting CO2 into the room. So there's CO2 running on the system. The tank is flooded. I'm gonna wait for those plants to recover a little bit. Normally I would do like a pretty decent trimming right now, but because of the little bit of die off, I'm gonna wait a bit before I do that. Once everything's looking like it's recovering, I'll do a nice little trim. I'm also gonna be throwing the solenoid that is on the CO2 system there on a timer so it turns off when the light turns off, so I don't waste CO2 at night when the plants really aren't using it. And that's about it. In a little while, I'm gonna check back and take a look at my drop checker there, make sure it's gone from blue to green. I wouldn't even mind at this point a yellowy green, so slightly heading towards too high for inhabitants. The plants won't be negatively affected by that, and when you're switching plants from being immersed to submersed, it can help with their kind of, little switch over, their transition, if you will. Thank you so much for watching. On the next episode, we're going to be looking at putting some purple plants in there, doing a little bit of trimming on the carpet. If it continues to do well, I'm hoping that we don't have any more setbacks, like a little bit of die off there. And that'll almost be a wrap for this tank. I think the only thing after that we're looking at is maybe some fish, some other livestock choices. That's fun. If you have any comments or questions, as always, the comment section is down below. Use it. I'd love to get back to you. And as always, subscribe. I'm gonna fix this sticker. It looks a little askew. Must be perfect. Ha. You can see that the top of the liquid, because that's where the gas first comes in, right, is turning green. Eventually it'll all turn that color with any luck.